10 more minutes for the chicken.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to part one of this City Club program on Cleveland's Wraparound Schools Initiative. My name is Piet van Lier. I'm with Policy Matters Ohio. Before I introduce our participants, I'd like to set the stage for what I hope to be a really productive dialogue today. In Cleveland, we call them wraparound schools. In Cincinnati, they're known as community learning centers. A common term nationally is community schools. And of course, we can't really use that in Ohio because that's a charter school, right? So here's the ideal as described in Community Schools in Action, a book written by a group of national experts. The school is open most of the time. It's governed by a partnership between the school system and a community agency. And it offers a broad array of health and social services. It often has an extended day before, after school. It features parent involvement programs, and it works to strengthen the surrounding neighborhood. Whatever we call it, it's about the same thing, right? It's about wrapping the community around the school and more completely addressing the needs of the students, families, and neighborhoods. One of the key things I've learned is that it's not a program as such. It's really a strategy. It's a different way of organizing community resources around community success. Marty Blank is one of the people who helped write that book I mentioned. He's the president of the Institute for Educational Leadership in Washington, D.C., and the founding director of the Coalition for Community Schools. The coalition brings together leaders and organizations in a whole array of sectors, right? Education, family support, youth development, early childhood, community development, government, philanthropy. And they all advocate for schools as centers of their communities. And it's where school and community resources are organized to support student success, strengthen families, and build healthier communities. P.G. Sittenfeld is the assistant director of the Community Learning Center Institute in Cincinnati, and he's also on city council there. The Institute leads the ongoing engagement of people in Cincinnati, greater Cincinnati, in the development of all schools as community learning centers, each with a set of financially self-sustaining, co-located partnerships responsive to the vision and needs of the school and the neighborhood. Bill Kitson has been president and CEO of the United Way of Greater Cleveland since June 2012. He came from Toledo's United Way, where he worked on a similar community-centered initiative. Eric Gordon has been CEO of the Cleveland School District since June 2011. He was appointed after serving 4 years as Chief Academic Officer. United Way and the district are working together to create 17 wraparound schools in our city, with lead partners to provide school-level coordination of available resources. Later this afternoon, as Dan mentioned, we'll be engaging school and neighborhood-level leaders in a separate discussion. I hope many of you can come to that as well. So how should these schools be structured? What helps them succeed and what gets in the way? Are they sustainable? How should we measure success of community schools or wraparound schools? These are some of the questions I hope we'll touch on today. We'll be having a discussion here on the stage for the first part of the program, which may go a little bit longer than the traditional City Club program. And my hope is that the deep experience of PG and Marty Blank will bring this discussion, this will help shape what's happening here in Cleveland. At the same time, this discussion can help inform the national discussion around this issue. So with that, I'd like to jump into questions. I'd like to start with Marty. So the Coalition for Community Schools is one of the primary advocates nationally for this approach. I'd like to hear your elevator speech. How do they work? What do you think support? What can come out of this work?
Well, first, thank you all for coming, and to the City Club for inviting me. It's a privilege to be back in Cleveland. We've had some conversations about this set of ideas in the past, and it's always exciting to see these kinds of concepts come to fruition. I think it's really important to start by recognizing what the challenge is and what the opportunity is. In Cleveland and in too many cities across the country, young people face a host of challenges to their learning and to their development. Some of you may have seen a PBS piece last Monday night, a week ago Monday, about the fact that young people in East Palo Alto, California, which is a very tough neighborhood right across the highway from Stanford University, that when they neuroimage their brains, they show post-traumatic stress syndrome. 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, and 11-year-olds. In the United States of America, God bless all of our soldiers who have that problem, but when our children do, it ought to be a wake-up call. So we know there are a set of challenges they face, and I don't need to go through each and every one of those. But the other side of that story, and equally important to us, is that they face a dearth of opportunity. And so increasingly around the country, people are talking not only about the achievement gap, but about the opportunity gap. Right? And this is becoming the kind of issue that needs to be debated in a place like the City Club, because the achievement gap is very results-oriented. It's focused very narrowly on a single indicator. Opportunity gap focuses on the multiple dimensions in young people's lives. The fact that too many young people in Cleveland and elsewhere don't get adequate pre-K, they don't get adequate after-school and enrichment opportunities compared to others, and they don't get the opportunity to prepare for college and career. Community wraparound schools, as you call them here, are intended to bring together all the assets and resources of this community, which are not insignificant, right? I understand the economic challenges that many cities like Cleveland face, but there are still institutions here that have assets and that have expertise. At the city level, with places like the Cleveland Clinic and Cleveland State, and at the neighborhood level, with the many community-based organizations and health and social services and mental health and youth organizations. In a community school, we want those people to come together in an intentional way to get the results that we need. We want the whole community involved. We're not just wrapping services around an individual child. We want to wrap the entire community, which means opportunities for learning in businesses, in internships and apprenticeships. It means mentors and tutors, of course. It means social supports. It means after school. But it means all of it being organized in a way that aligns with the mission of the public school, right? Not a narrow mission, I hope, but one that seeks to educate young people for college, for career, and for citizenship. How does it work? Very quickly. We need strong leadership at the community level, and I think that's emerging here. In fact, it probably is in place. We need leadership at the school site, where principals are open to the assets and resources of the community and learn how to put those together. We need partners who come together at the school site to really make their work sing. I often say to people, are you a partner in a school, and who else is in the building, and do you talk to each other, right? Are the adults who will live in the same physical space with 500, 400, 700 children talking to each other about what is going on with the young people we're trying to serve, and how can we do our work better? And of course, you need somebody who manages all that, whether you call them a wraparound coordinator, a community school coordinator, a site coordinator. This is a real job. The resources of this community are substantial, and they can, you don't bring them in ad hoc. You've got to bring them in intentionally. So that kind of coordination function is crucial. And the last thing that's really crucial is that all those people sit down and look at the data about the children they're serving. Yes, the academic data, but also the attendance data, right? You got a chronic absence problem in Cleveland, Eric?
Yes, we do.
All right. Chronic absence doesn't mean just the kids are truant. It means the kids have excused and unexcused absences. So they're not there for health reasons. They're not there because there's family or parental mental health issues or economic issues. The schools aren't resourced to deal with that complexity. Community schools with their partnership can do that. So the focus on results, whether it's chronic absence or improved reading or reducing behavioral problems, is crucial to people really being able to make change.
Great. PG, you're here today because of Cincinnati. The implementation there has gone real well. You're a national model. The program's there, the initiative there. I'd like you to talk about what's changed in Cincinnati. What's come out of the work there?
Great. Well, let me first say it's also a pleasure to be here. This is my first time at the City Club. I woke up at about 4:45 in Cincinnati this morning, and I thought it's too warm down here. Where can I go to get a nice draft of refreshing air? So I sped up 71. And let me also just say it's a pleasure to be part of this panel of luminaries. I know many of you know this, but when it comes to community schools, community learning centers, Marty Blank is a big deal. Down in Cincinnati, we call him the godfather of community learning centers. We mean that as a compliment, not in the Marlon Brando sort of way. The one thing I do want to actually just start by doing by way of answering that question, in case anyone's saying, what's the Cincinnati guy doing on stage, is establish a little bit of credibility. We've been doing this work longer than Cleveland has, a little bit over a decade. And in that decade plus, this is on the recently changed state report card, but Cincinnati, at the time that we went to establish a community learning center initiative, was ranked in state academic emergency. Since then, we rose from academic emergency to academic watch to continuous improvement to a rating of effective, making us the top-rated urban public school district in the state, which is you all are a very hospitable audience. That was not meant to be an applause line. I mean, we're proud of the progress. No one is spiking the football or uncorking the champagne, but thinking about where we started and how we've gotten to where we've gone, we're proud of that. Our academic performance index gone from the high 50s to the mid 80s. Things Marty talked about sort of that matter hugely in terms of your ability to learn, but aren't necessarily an academic grade. Immunization rates, asthma identification, risen by double-digit percentages. We had, in the last year, every major mayoral candidate from New York City came to sit down with us in Cincinnati. So Mayor de Blasio sat down with them and talked to him about this model in a classroom at Euler School in Lower Price Hill in Cincinnati. He's now using the word extraordinary to talk about this. So I only mention all of those things to say we are proud of what we've been able to do. And in terms of what it's done, and I know we'll have a chance to get through a lot of this, but it honestly has restored community trust. Even though I'm getting increasingly salt and pepper here, when I was growing up, it was a foregone conclusion that if there was a levy on the ballot, it was going to fail. Since this has gone into effect in the decade plus, people believe in this model. They're passing levies. And there are sort of three secret ingredients, what I think of the secret sauce to making wraparound schools, to making community learning centers work. It's community engagement, it's coordination, and it's customization. And hopefully I can say a word about the last two. But in terms of community engagement, I was reading an article in the Plain Dealer. I know there have been 17 community engagement sessions at different sites, and I think that's awesome. I think the reason this has been successful and sustainable in Cincinnati is because in the most sincere, earnest way, we went to the community and we didn't say we're going to have a community engagement session. All right, check, we've asked their opinion. Now let's do what we were going to do all along. My work started in community engagement, so before we would go and build or renovate a new school, I spent a year and a half meeting with the same group of people, teachers, parents, students, neighborhood social service agencies, neighborhood business leaders, faith leaders, saying, we're going to build a school and it's going to be more than just an old-fashioned school. It's going to be a round-the-clock hub, bustling with activity that's going to benefit everybody. What do you want in this school? What do you want it to be? And I think a process that was that thorough, that sustained, and that deep really earned a lot of trust. So not only did you get the product that you wanted at the end of the day, but people said, I built that. The school district didn't build that. That wasn't given to us. We created that, and I think it's been huge in our success. So the top thing I would say it's done is it's restored public trust. And as someone who, on the other side of the coin, I'm a Cincinnati city councilman. I represent the entire city. There's nothing more important than that, than having people believe that what you're doing, they're a part of.
Great. So Bill, you came from from Toledo. You were doing similar work. And I think what I hear is that the United Way's partnership with the district, you pushed that and made that happen. What drove you to do that? Why do you think it's so important, and what do you hope to get out of it? What do you think?
Well, the reality is, at the end of the day, we have to wrap help around kids and families. And when you take a look at all the different players that can make that happen, ultimately United Way is one of the unique organizations positioned to be able to play in all those different spaces. And so we felt that as you start to look across the community, who can do this, who can step in, we can step in. We're not running the programs. We're actually seeking great neighborhood organizations to make that happen. But we can bring them together, we can mobilize the resources for them, we can help train them, create a learning circle so that they can interact with each other, and it provides the connection points so that you have a consistent model across the community, but yet you have the individualness that each school has to have in order for it to be successful.
Great. Eric, you've obviously wanted this in the Cleveland plan. This has been a goal of yours. And now that things are up and running in Cleveland, I think we've laid the groundwork for what's happening. What do you see as what's helping make it work right now? What's really, aside from the United Way partnership, what's really kicking it into gear and making it move forward from this point?
Well, I guess I would start by saying what's unique about Cleveland and the Cleveland Plan is really at the heart of why I think this is successful. You know, when you look at the Cleveland Plan and the work that our community's done over the last 2.5 years, it's been billed nationally as the fix without a fight. That we were able, as a district and a teachers union, as charter school partners and district partners, as Republicans and Democrats, as faith leaders and business leaders, all to come together in a common understanding of what we need for children in this community is really actually very unique in this country. I don't know that you could actually go anywhere else and say it's as tight as it is in Cleveland. So now take that and now apply it locally actually into our schools. You know, we're not going to solve this problem 40,000 children at a time, but we can solve this problem 400 kids times 100 at a time. We can make it manageable and meaningful, and we can use a strategy of a community that has truly circled around collectively, set aside differences, set aside biases, set aside political assuasion, and said we're all going to work toward this goal. You know, I think this is my 7th year in Cleveland, and I think the promise and parish of our community is a long legacy of philanthropic wealth. We actually do have the resources, many more resources than lots of other communities. But we have for far too long had enough resource that everybody could do their own thing. And so it was all going on, but we weren't doing it in any kind of coordinated way. And so what this really allows us to do is to take that same level of energy of coming together as a school community at the big level and doing exactly the same thing, now 17, next 27, soon 100 different times. And I think that's really at the heart of why this is such an important and fast-moving strategy in our community. And I guess I would just close kind of the general comments about this is, you know, people say to me all the time, like, what's your biggest fear, excuse me, about the Cleveland Plan? And my biggest fear is that people are going to say, hey, we got you that legislation, we got you that levy, see you in 4 years, good luck, right? And actually, that's not what has happened. What has happened instead is people have said, okay, now what do we do next? How do we come together? So how does Esperanza work with some of our schools like Walton, really close, and then take advantage of all of the assets around those communities? How does that happen in Mound and the P16 work that was, I would argue, has been the flagship of where we really planted the flag? And in really actionable, tangible ways. One of my most exciting wraparound experiences, and this will sound very basic, but really meaningful to kids, was standing in Third Federal Bank with posters all around the room where we were coordinating every summer activity available in the Slavic village community so that kids had a calendar of things to do all year round. And people going, oh, you're doing basketball in June? Well, I'll do mine in July so that there's more basketball. And just simple coordination efforts that this has allowed. And so I just think that it's just another symbol of why reform is ripe and working here in Cleveland. And it's what it looks like on the ground.
Just to add a couple of things to that, you know, because I think that this last example is really important. I mean, some people will sometimes tell me, well, it's a really complicated proposition. But if you can bring together all the people who do summer and say, right, as my friends in Kansas City say, you know, for many children, summer is now a desert, okay? There's no place to eat, there's no place to do stuff. At the same time, we recognize how important summer learning is, so everyone who's in the summer learning space needs to sit together as a network of people and say, how are we going to fill this space so that the well-being of children, the learning of children, is a really critical focus. And the same can be said for the people who worry about attendance. And so this is a really important focus. And in Cincinnati, they've done something that, frankly, I've been encouraging but haven't yet seen in other communities, and something for you to think about early on here as this work develops in Cleveland. So in Cincinnati, they organized a cross-boundary leadership team. If Darlene came on, we're here, she might give me a small role in that, because I was out there one day and having lunch with her and somebody from a collaborative called Mind Peace, which is a group of mental health providers who are trying to improve mental health in the schools. Is there such a group in Cleveland? Yeah? So and then there was somebody sitting across who's from a group called Growing Well, which is concerned about medical services and dental services. I bet there's some place where that goes on in Cleveland. And there was another person from the after-school group. And I said to them, gee, you should be having lunch every month because you are all working in this place that we all call a public school. And if you're going to work there, then you have to think together about how to organize your resources more strategically. So they now have a cross-boundary leadership team that cuts across more than a dozen different domains, because in America we're always organizing clusters and groups, right? So there's a No Child Left Inside group that's worried about environmental education, right? There is a health group, there's a mental health group, there's a tutoring group, there's a mentoring group, and everybody, God bless them, thinks they have the solution, okay? But what you get with this cross-boundary leadership team is the kind of communication that allows people to use their resources more smartly and more effectively, and to think about the problems they face and what they experience. So this concept that I think we're all talking about here, about moving the resources of the community into alignment with our public schools, is really crucial. We've tended, if my former boss, Mike Usdan, were here, he would say, we separated public schools from general purpose government because we were worried about corruption, and we isolated them from government, from United Ways, from other institutions. And we said, go forth, educate our children. And then the children changed and the problem changed, and now we are trying to come back to bringing our community together. And so a cross-boundary leadership team, places where community leaders come together and say, this is really important. The Transformation Alliance represents an important vehicle in that regard, because it's a place where people can say, so how's this going, right? How are we going to really make this work? And we need the city and the school district and the United Way and the Cleveland Foundation and the Gun Foundation and others, and the Nordson Foundation, of course, to really come together to think about this. But at the same time, make sure you're paying attention to the grassroots piece of this, to the ownership piece of this. We need to make sure that the young people and their families are engaged in this process of change, right? Big debates at the national level about poverty and responsibility and so forth. We have to figure out how to engage people, right? Doesn't mean you don't do anything to get started, but you've got to be able to say that what we're doing is responsive so people feel this sense of ownership of their public schools.
I'm glad you brought it back to that, Marty, because one thing that struck me from what PG said, and I think you've all touched on to some degree, is the ownership of, he talked about how part of restoring hope in Cincinnati has been really the community, the residents, the parents, the families owning the process, and the schools to some degree.
Right.
So I'd like to hear from, in Cleveland, how is that progressing? What are some of the barriers? What's making that work to the extent that it is? I know that the site coordinators are fairly new, but how do you see that happening here?
Well, I think we have to think about the ownership in our community, both from a technical ownership way, which is probably the question you're asking, Pete, but then also actually about an attitudinal ownership as well. I think and I'm going to start there actually, because I think one of the most important parts of this strategy is to get all of us to stop looking at risks and start looking at assets. And the first thing this does is change our mental model by saying, what are all of the resources of a community, instead of lamenting about all of the problems of a community. All of us in Cleveland know how many times I've been asked to explain, well, how can you do this work with your parents who don't care? And then you hear me say, don't tell me my parents don't care, they do, right? It's a change in the way we even approach our parents, our families, our communities, as not as broken and needed to be fixed, but actually as rich assets that should be working all together for our kids. So what does it look like technically? I will tell you, in preparation for some other comments, I emailed 3 different principals who have these community partners that literally have been with them for about a month. And my question was, tell me some things in your investment school that have worked. And every principal gave me something, but to the principal, they mentioned, and my partner, my wraparound partner. In Mound, I have an example where we put a healthcare center right in Mound School. 20 families are now insured because going to school, they found out that they qualify for insurance that they didn't even know that they were eligible for. they are better off today, technically better off today. You know, in FDR, in the Glenville neighborhood, we put a Boys and Girls Club right in the school. The principal will tell you now he has tutoring and after-school work available for his kids, and it is one of the things driving it. One of the neatest examples, in my opinion, is in Collinwood High School, where Stepstone and Guidestone partnership through the mental health social service agencies was who they chose. But what actually has been the immediate response is that the coordinator found out that the kids really wanted a boxing club and that they were expressing really negative behaviors in the community that could become very positive behaviors in the gym. And that they really wanted to restore the pride of the railroaders by bringing back a drum line and a flag corps and those sorts of things. Very community responsive, and the resources were right there in the community. And so it's those technical reconnections at a very early stage that are going to both change our mindset about how we approach schools that we have traditionally considered broken beyond repair, and then by association, families and communities that are broken beyond repair, to actually looking at assets that should be completely wrapped around our children and their community to make success occur.
I want to, go ahead.
So as we began this process, the principal didn't pick the lead agency. The principal, a teacher, a parent, a community member came together as a committee to pick the lead agency. As the lead agency hired the staff person, again, that teacher, principal, and parent had an opportunity to interview the staff coordinator as they're coming into their school. So there's a shared ownership, a shared opportunity, and parents are equally valued in that conversation.
I was just going to say that, you know, community engagement, I think this is an important point. It's kind of a happy phrase, right? Let's all get together and enjoy each other. It might be a happy term, but it's not always a happy process. And that meant plenty of, honestly, rough conversations, but the friction was healthy. And even though I have in this role always been a partner and a supporter and a cheerleader for the school system, there have been times when I was organizing people to rise up and push back against the school district. And Eric, that maybe isn't what you want to hear, but I think in the end,
it happens here.
I do believe that ends up being a healthier process. As another example to what Bill just said, we have the same thing at the site level, and at the sort of the second piece I mentioned was the customization. It shouldn't be from the top down saying, we're going to tell every school what's good for them, or the same thing is good for every school. We all know that that's not true. So this is a clunky acronym, but each school in Cincinnati has an LSDMC, Local School Decision Making Committee. Teachers, parents, I know, don't copy the acronym. LSDMC, including the first part of that, not so good either. Teachers, parents, community members, and if a partnership within the school, they might be a good partnership, but if they're not the right fit for that school, the LSDMC terminates them. They say, go and do what you do, but you're not going to be doing it here. So I think that customization is huge. And one other thing from what Marty said earlier, he talked about the alignment of existing resources, and that has been huge in Cincinnati. Before lunch, Pete was talking about an upcoming levy that we have, which I would frankly would be shocked if it didn't pass. It's a levy renewal. But if it didn't pass, the Community Learning Center infrastructure in Cincinnati would be almost virtually bulletproof. It would obviously put a big strain on teachers and the operating budget of the district. So I fully support it passing. But the co-located health centers, the after-school programming, parent engagement pieces, none of that would be impacted because we've taken existing resources and deployed them in a seamless, efficient manner inside the context of the school.
That's a perfect segue because I want to touch on sustainability. So clearly you've grappled with that in Cincinnati. So I'd like to hear both from national level and here in Cleveland, like how are you looking at how to keep this kind of programming going? Because it's about leveraging existing resources, but there is some cost, whether it's site coordinators or what have you, to keep it going. So I'd like to hear from the three of you who haven't spoken right now about that.
Well, the national picture goes something like this. The direct support, the opportunities we want to offer children, the engagement of their families, the health services. I mean, goodness knows we don't need to spend any more money on health services in Cleveland, right? Or in the country, right? We need to figure out how to get those health services better organized. So the financing theory of community schools is that the youth services, the health services, the mental health support, the parent leadership comes from across the existing resources. Okay. Now I know that there's not always enough, and they're not organized correctly. But we're not trying to fund those services. We're trying to fund the leadership vehicles and the infrastructure to tie it all together. So, you know, when Arnie Duncan's folks asked me what was it going to cost to start a community school in Chicago, I said $130,000. 10,000 for technical, 10,000 for evaluation, 20,000 for technical assistance, 75,000 for the coordination, the site coordinator function, and 25,000 for some gap money, some glue money to tie everyone together so they could try some new things in addition to pulling things together more effectively. That's been what people have found viable. So yes, there is a cost, but the coordination cost can also be financed from multiple places. We see local foundations, we see school districts. Title I money can be used for this. Yes, it can. There's no reason why it can't, but school districts shouldn't be the only funder of this because we need that kind of community support for it. So that's what we see. We see in Multnomah County, Oregon, the city and the county just agreed to expand the number of community schools to 80, largely funded, this coordination function, by the city and the county with some school district support. So that's how we've been able to make this happen and make this grow. What it also does is to avoid the community school competing with the other stuff, all right? So we're not saying community schools are more important than after school. We're saying we all want to come together, and so the community school leadership will advocate for more after school money, for more mental health services, for a better delivery of health services. But we've got to be willing to finance the glue that puts it all together and builds the social capital around our kids that we so badly need.
So Bill, or Eric, I mean, you've been financing some of that glue and
It's
getting it started, right?
Here in Cleveland, we measure it at about 100 grand. Because you have a little bit of volume. When you go 17 schools, you can do some of that training a
I'm
little
not
cheaper.
quibbling about that number.
So, and our thoughts, you know, as Eric starts to roll more and more of these schools out, you could probably get a little cheaper than that, but not much. Really, it's around $100,000 a school. This first round of 17, I hate to say this out loud, is fairly easy from a community sense, raising the money for it. The district, $500,000 from United Way, and then resources from our community partners like the Cleveland Foundation, the Jewish Federation, Cleveland Browns in Park, Ohio came together at a school. St. Luke's Foundation did 2 schools. So that's great. My kind of, I don't say fear, but as we roll more and more schools out, that list gets a little shorter of folks who are available to drop $100,000 on a new project like this. So that sustainable funding model is going to get really interesting as the community rolls more and more and more out. That first round of organic, I want to be in and partner with you in this is great, but over the course of time, it's going to be interesting how you go from 17 to 27 and then beyond. There's got to be a bigger conversation.
Mm-hmm. So I would say that I would connect it to why United Way is particularly important in this work. So 100,000 is our bet that it's a seed, that it's a seed money. We are very data driven. That's part of what United Way is able to do, have common metrics that we've agreed for. We're talking about $250 a kid. There are lots and lots of things being out there funded right now without evidence that is costing $250 a kid. There are monies to be redeployed when we are able to show that A, we know who is off track and what we're going to do about it. B, we show how quickly we're closing those gaps. Attendance is rising, kids are getting tutoring, there's after-school programming, and that it's got an academic orientation, families are getting health care, all of these sorts of things. That we should very quickly be able to come back and say, here's the results, and here's what we're asking you to fund. Results. It's improving in our community at $100,000 or $250 a kid and family at a time. Where the United Way is important for our community is that the United Way is a coordinator of funding in these very areas. I mean, it is its primary mission. And so as the United Way continues to inform our community about where their dollars are going to get the best bang for their buck, I think we've got a great, compelling story to tell that should make it bulletproof, that should make it very quickly something that there's so many different resources being aligned that we can all contribute to the sustainability. I really think that there's a really quick way to make this an embedded practice. I think what's important, though, and I think what we're doing really well and what we've learned from places like Cincinnati, is this is not the old lighted schoolhouse where the school should provide health care, daycare, this care, that care, because then it is all dependent upon the dollars of the district, which have been in this community very, very lean until the successful passage of Issue 107. It cannot rely on any one organization. I think that's part of the beauty of the way we structured this.
One thing that comes to mind for me when I hear about leveraging existing resources and sustaining this kind of work is the county, because the county provides a lot of social services, and it seems to be a natural partner, or at least pieces of the puzzle. I mean, what's happening with Cuyahoga County in that regard here?
So I would say that a lot of the county resources are what's actually flowing into the agency services that the community wraparound partners now connect into our schools in a more intentional way. The county, our county, I would say is very, very proactive on education. Not just education for Cleveland, but for our county. There are very few counties in America that actually have a explicit strategy. Big investments in early childhood education, which is critical to our success. Huge investments now in the child scholarship funds so that kids start thinking about college from kindergarten on. So we have a county executive and a county leadership that is very intentional. We have not yet talked with the county about how to rethink the resources that are going directly into agency services, but those agencies are exactly what the partners are connecting to kids in a more proactive way. So I think it's another part of the partnership that allows this to become sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Before we go into Q&A, I have one more area I'd like to touch on, which is, some of you have already discussed it. How do you measure success? We've got the state test scores is what everybody looks to today. I'm not sure, it sounds like in Cincinnati they've excelled in that area, they've worked on that area, but especially in the short term, it seems as though there might be other ways to really point to success and show the community that there is success. So I'd like to hear, how can we measure that success? And
Got it.
Ask Bill.
I think this is Bill's.
We need to be very clear. It's ABC. A, attendance, B, behavioral, C, core competencies, and D is, ABCs. Oh, ABCs. There's no D. I added an extra one. Sorry, ABCs. So.
Yeah, I thought we were getting something new.
Yeah, I was like, Eric's like, wow, this is a new measure. Sorry.
Let me see that sheet.
I added one on you. So what that means, ABC means number of students enrolled, number of students identified at risk, number of students identified needing tutoring and mentoring services, attendance, disciplinary actions, starting grade point average, and the number of community-based organizations in that school. We add a couple measures as we get further into the work, but we need to keep this simple. We need to keep measuring the things that are already being measured. Attendance is already being measured, behavioral issues are already being measured, core competency is already being measured. And then we need to align and track those against all those schools so that we can see which schools are really driving it and use those examples to help others.
I would be remiss if I didn't add one thing, because obviously, you know, our academics going up, our behavioral issues going down, is attendance going up. I mean, that, of course, that should be measured. But in Cincinnati, I think one of the other things that we've done effectively is this is not just a strategy for poor kids. This is not just a strategy for somebody else's kids. By making schools bustling centerpieces for the neighborhood, is there a broader community revitalization? Are more people buying houses? Are more people moving into the city? Are middle-class families looking and saying, that school that wasn't even on my radar, that's good enough for not just somebody else's kid, but for my kid. So it's very difficult to measure what does community revitalization looks like, but if you're not keeping that in mind as part of this strategy, I think you're missing a huge piece.
So he just opened the door for what I wanted to say about the ABCs. So I was very instrumental in the ABCs, and there were a lot of people saying it was too narrow. And it is too narrow if that's how you think about it. We have to think about it about all of the connectivity that the ABCs draw. You have to measure something, and for me, as an organizational leader in a very short time, it has to be about achievement change, which comes from getting kids to school, helping them experience school successfully, bringing resources around them so that they get achievement. But it is, again, a mindset of what ABC will allow. It is the ABCs that allow for recognizing all of the additional resources, the opportunities, the revitalization that you're hearing Cincinnati has experienced. And when you look at it that way, the ABCs are the things that we can measure as short-term leading indicators to community changes in a lagging way that are the really important and powerful pieces of this.
Marty, I'd like you to
No,
finalize it. then we'll go
I
to
think
Q&A.
that's right. You know, the ABCs has been something that came out of the work of Bob Balfance at the Johns Hopkins, and I think it's a powerful framework. The dilemma is always that when you get a group of diverse interests in a room, everybody wants their indicator, right? At the national level, there's a National Forum on Child and Family Statistics. They have 160 indicators because they want to measure accidents that happen for elderly people. And that's an important thing to measure for a certain group. But we can't have too much. So this concept of what are the driving indicators, right? So attendance, not just ADA, but chronic absence, is a really important driver because I think we'd all agree that showing up matters for learning. In fact, the city of Minneapolis once did a study, and they found that the kids that attended more learned more. Gee whiz. But the flip side of that is that the numbers, you know, I sat in Ralph Smith's office at the Casey Foundation 10 years ago, and he said, you know, 7% of the kids are chronically absent in the state, but in the disinvested neighborhoods of Baltimore, it's 38%. All right. So it's a driving indicator that tells you a whole lot, so it's really important. But I do want to make one more point that I think I think that Eric would agree with, and that is that the change has to happen for the whole school. The quality of what goes on in teaching and learning is crucial, absolutely crucial. But when he spoke about what the young people wanted, when he spoke about the drum line and the boxing, he was speaking about how do we engage kids so that they connect their schooling to things that are important in their lives. And I think that's where all of us have an important thing to contribute. So you can't just do the drum line if the teachers and the principal don't work with the partners and understand what's going on here, right? Because there's a lot you can do with drum lines. There's a lot you can do with gardens. There's a lot you can do with partners, with what partners do that can influence what happens inside the school. But we run into trouble with this work if we imply that everything that's been going on inside the school, and I know that every educator I know doesn't say this, is good. It isn't. It's not where it needs to be. But partnership is more than just about health and social supports. It is about how we can help kids learn more and learn better, and how we improve the quality of what happens in our classrooms.
Thank you. So now we're going to take our traditional mid-program break. I have a few announcements, but I want to say that there's some great questions. Hopefully during Q&A more will come up, whether it's on the same issues or some new ones that I hadn't thought about. I certainly have more questions I'd love to keep asking. Anyway, we're going to extend the program a little bit longer than usual. If you need to leave at 1:30, totally understandable, but hopefully some of you can stay and continue to engage in the dialogue. So, official announcements. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we're listening to a special forum on the opportunities and challenges on Cleveland's Wraparound Schools initiative. We're going to return in a bit for our traditional Q&A period. We encourage you to formulate questions now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. We welcome all of you here and those joining us through our primary media partner, 90.3 WCPN, 104.9 WCLV, and WVIZ PBS Idea Stream, or on one of the many other radio stations across the country that carry City Club programs. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. Today we welcome guests at tables hosted by the Center for Educational Leadership at Cleveland State University, Cleveland Metropolitan School District, Cleveland Teachers Union, Cleveland Transformation Alliance, Nordson Corporation Foundation, United Way, and University Settlement. Thank you all for your support. Today's program is part of the Education Innovation Series that is sponsored as part of a generous grant from the Nordson Foundation, with sponsorship support from the Cleveland Transformation Alliance. Community partners for this program include the Center for Educational Leadership and Policy Matters Ohio. We thank you all for your support. An announcement: Friday, April 4th, the City Club is pleased to welcome David Kerp. He's a professor at the University of California and author of Improbable Scholars. For more information about our upcoming forums, to make a reservation, or to order a CD or DVD of today's program, please go to the website cityclub.org. All right, well, now we'd like to return to our traditional City Club Q&A, I think. Yes, okay. Holding the microphones today are Development Associate Mike Grimaldi and Program Director Carrie Miller. First question.
Hi, I'm just wondering, it all sounds terrific, and it all sounds really financially doable, and it really sounds desirable. How do you work on convincing an administration that feels like they're already overwhelmed with the legalities of the things that are going on and the testing and the garbage, I might say? Thank you.
I'll give a personal example of our work in Toledo, since there's no one from Toledo here, right? It literally took us 3 years to convince the district and the leadership in various aspects of the district to make this happen. And for us, we just had to continue to show up and build trust that we really were a trustworthy partner that could make this happen for them. At the same time, we did a little bit of advocating on the outside and pushed some parents and students and some other community organizations to kind of push the district on the other side and made that happen. When I got here, Eric was already here, and they were in the middle of all this work, and we just raised our hand at the right moment in time, so we got really lucky. Ultimately, what it's going to come down to is helping the district trust that the community really can come in that space and make that happen. And I think that, unfortunately, sometimes that trust takes a while to build, and in other communities it can happen pretty quickly. But I would bet there are some other examples.
So I would just say, and I see a number of my administrators here, I would say part of what we did really well is we got to action quickly, and we made simple things occur that showed our principals and our teacher leaders that they were getting help and not getting more to deal with. And so, when I talk to people about starting these work organically before we got to be more intentional, I would always say, if you're meeting, you've already missed the mark. Your meeting should be an action day, right? You're sitting together doing something. I described the mapping out of the summer program as something that people came together and do. A principal will make time for that. I think the other thing is, if it is structured in a simple way where things are coordinated, it actually makes the principal's life a whole lot easier. Because in the traditional model, the principal in the school is an institution, not part of a community, and so every community asset and leader calls the principal and expects a call back. And so if I'm the principal, I got to call you and you and you and you and you. If instead we all convene and have a dialogue of which I'm one part, I get to communicate and understand in a collective way, in a much actually more efficient way. So I think having an action orientation for simple actions that show help and having a coordinated way of dialoguing are two keys that have helped us to move quickly.
I hope you all know that you have a standing invitation to come visit us in Cincinnati. And when you do, what you would see is the superintendent say this model has been helpful, not a hassle. You'd see the president of the school board say this model has been helpful, not a hassle. You would see the president of our teachers union say the same thing. You would see the head of Parents for Public Schools in Cincinnati say the same thing. So I just think giving that reminder that this lets everyone do what they are best suited to do. It lets teachers teach. It lets the partners deliver the services that they deliver. So this makes everyone's life easier and better, and that's kind of the point. So hopefully, if explained right, it shouldn't be as hard to sell.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My question has to do with the professional development plan for those wraparound coordinators. And having done some of that work in a lighted schoolhouse environment, one of the things that we learned is that it's not just about coordination of services. It really needs to move to a collaborative kind of format where shared resources are happening, shared visioning and all of that. So I'm wondering what kind of professional development is going forward. And Mr. Sittenfeld, I want to say we will be visiting you. The National Urban League Conference is in Cincinnati this year, so we'll be there to see you.
Stay a while, spend lots of money.
So if you start our work as a community partner, you go through CMSD 101, and that is something we intentionally designed to help our partners better understand who we are, what resources we have, what assets we have. Likewise, if you are a school who is partnered, We actually have tried to provide professional development to our teachers and leaders in those schools as well. We worked with our grassroots organizations, for example, at R.G. Jones, the Greater Cleveland Congregation and Grassroots, which is one of the ways we're connecting people, actually trained our teachers and our leaders in that school about how to better reach out and be receptive to people who are trying to reach in, because that's not something schools have always done traditionally well. So our professional development is a two-way street. We don't think that it's about teaching people how to access school. It's about teaching each of us how to access each other. And then I would say we also know what's good about any kind of training is that it's not one time. And so our coordinators already know that there are monthly meetings where we come together and continue to learn in what we intend to be a rapidly growing professional community of learners. And so I think actually it's something that our team has given, our team being people representing United Way, the partners themselves in the district have given a really great deal of thought to.
I just would add one quick point to that, and that is that I hope as this evolves, the school district and Cleveland State and others will also think about the pipeline. We need to prepare the next generation, indeed this generation of principals, to function in this way. Right. It's more about shared leadership, distributive leadership, if you will. It's an asset orientation, which is crucial. I really want to underline what Eric said about that. So it's something that is missing. You know, when I ask principals doing this work, I ask them two questions. What did you learn about working with families? And they say about un peu, a little bit. And then I ask them what you learned about community, right? Nada. Nothing. And so it's really important that we think about this, particularly as the country becomes increasingly more diverse and we face a variety of growing socioeconomic challenges, right? Not only for our poorest and our minority children, but for growing numbers of people across the country who are facing economic challenges. So we've got to keep a leadership development thrust here and deal with it for our teachers as well.
I'm a former teacher, and I want to address Martin Blank's comment about the cruciality of the classroom experience. What's going on in the classroom, after all, finally is fundamental. And I'm very concerned about what has happened as a result of our transformation process in Cleveland. And I'm afraid what we're looking at and what we need to look at is the kids that have been left behind. I think Policy Matters has spoken to this, the degree to which our so-called successful schools have actually represented parents that took advantage of opportunities for their children, of parents often from a higher socioeconomic class status. So let me get back to the classroom of those kids that have been left behind. As a teacher, I can tell you this is an extraordinarily difficult working environment, extraordinarily difficult. To some degree, the models of excellence have left these schools, literally. Good for those kids. But the question is this. Let's please remember that we've got to look at, well, let me go to the degree that we're going to continue to emphasize test score performance. I'm afraid the district is setting itself up for failure. If you're going to promise to the Clevelanders you're going to see great increases in test scores, I can tell you as a teacher, the more focus that I have to do as a teacher on passing a test, the more turning off I'm doing with kids. I'm afraid that's just the way it is. Kids will not respond to a continuous grindstone of getting a test score.
So I would just say very briefly, the community wraparound strategy is intentionally connected to schools where we are investing resources and supports in the classroom and in what the teacher experience is. Lowest performing schools, not highest performing schools. Very intentionally why they're here. And the other thing I would say is that we are in a country that relies heavily on test scores, but in 7 years, I have never told a teacher to focus on a test. And in high performing districts and districts I've worked, they don't. They instead focus on really rigorous classroom experiences, problem-based, project-based experiences where kids access content and knowledge and therefore can perform on a test. So if we do this well, we can actually restore high-quality teaching and get the results. If instead, and we're testing, in that testing window now, and when I go in schools, I see teachers starting to go right back to, we got to prep for that test. Not one time have I advocated for that. We have to do exactly what you're saying. We have to teach rigorously, We have to teach robustly and roundly, and there are ways to do that that will deliver those results.
Hi, Ann Galetta from Cleveland State University. Marty, it was wonderful to hear you refer to the opportunity gap and the importance of the emphasis on that. A question for Cleveland. Eric, how will you, how are you envisioning, this has already begun, but as you build on this, creating in the schools and attending to ways to make the space of the schools more open, more conducive, more attention to social and emotional development of kids in terms of restructuring existing policies, such as creating advisories during the day so that teachers can connect with kids and know what they might need in terms of those after-school services or in-school services, and also transportation. How will you address transportation of kids so that they can stay late, that they can get home safely?
So fortunately, we're in a community that has done a great deal around the social and emotional learning needs of kids, much more than many other communities that you would see. We have in the past 7 years, and done it directly with partners with our Cleveland Teachers Union, moved from very punitive kinds of strategies like in-school suspension rooms to responsive strategies that we now have planning centers. We actually physically changed the space so that they have soft seating where kids can de-escalate when they're in trouble, that they have private spaces where they can be counseled by people who we have trained monthly for now 7 years, 7 solid years, about how to help kids, that they have resources to help identify what that problem is and how they might choose a different strategy the next time. We have implemented class meetings in some of our high schools, and we've spent a great deal of training so that our high school leaders, teacher leaders now can run class meetings. We've implemented promoting alternative thinking strategies. I was just in a classroom last week where the kids were taking time and identifying their feelings so that they knew how they were going to respond to each other because they had actually taken time to talk about their feelings. And we have student support teams that are active, meaningful, engaged teams to help think about what are the needs and how do we connect to the resources of the community. So in a very short time, there is a ton of opportunity that the district and our teachers union have intentionally worked on. And it sprang, very honestly, from the shooting in 2007. And we made a commitment to ourselves that we would never stop talking about that. Most communities want to put it away and move on. And we actually said that if we do, it'll happen again. But if we are intentional about reminding ourselves that it can't happen again, we'll remain intentional about changing it. Around transportation, transportation is trickier because it's a resource issue. But we have at all of our high schools and now made available 6 through 12 RTA access if the student lives a half a mile or more from their school. And that access is from early morning to late evening so that it is not just before or after school. For K through 5, it's a little more tricky because they rely heavily on yellow bus service, and just from an efficiency standpoint, our buses run 2 or 3 trips a day, and so it's more difficult for us to run staggered opportunities. It's an issue we continue to work on. But even there, compared to when I came to the district and we had a 2-mile walk zone for our K through 8 schools and a 3-mile walk zone for our high schools, and then wondered why kids didn't come to school, we're now at a half-mile walk zone for all children with access before and after for grades 6 through 12, which is an important step forward.
I'm Bob Papanetti with the Literacy Cooperative. PJ, I'm interested in how you connect to other initiatives and actually avoid duplication with other worthwhile initiatives that are happening in Cincinnati. For example, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, I believe, is in Cincinnati. Do you connect with that? And again, how do you avoid duplicating efforts?
I think the sort of architecture of this model is meant to do exactly that. And it was when Marty was talking about the cross-boundary leadership team earlier. So the sort of team captain that represents all of the providers within a given area, after-school programming, mental health, primary health. They're actually meeting as we speak, Marty. So I have a good excuse to not be there. But by having everyone communicating and looking towards shared goals, I think it's first and foremost a communication issue. So I think this is part of the reason investors, and while there aren't as much public dollars in this, private philanthropy has been very generous. I know that this is a top commitment of the United Way here. Same deal in Cincinnati. The United Way and the Greater Cincinnati Foundation were in from the start with major contributions. And you sometimes see with foundations We'll give you 3 years or maybe 5 years, and we hope the problem's fixed. Here we are a decade later, and we still remain a top priority of theirs. So I think just showing people that this has worked and that it actually represents, we think, about as efficient an investment as you could possibly make has been successful. So not a very profound answer, but I think make sure you have the infrastructure there for constant and thorough communication, and you won't be repetitive.
I think that's really important. At the national level, and it's sort of very American again, somebody always thinks they have a better idea. Right? So you get lots of people coming to communities saying, do this, do this, do this. What we've been trying to do with the Coalition for Community Schools is say, we need local community leadership to own the problem of educating all of our children to the highest standards, right? And that kind of ownership is crucial whether you want to, pick the strategy. So if this community has chosen to make its schools centers of community, when the grade level reading campaign arrives, or when Promise arrives, or any other strategy, it's got to be a question of how does this resource add value to what we are already doing? Sometimes when people arrive, they try to pick off sort of other stakeholders who aren't involved or aren't engaged. It's really important to keep everyone together on the same page. That doesn't mean that you don't need somebody coming in and say, well, Bill, Eric, is it really working as well as you say? All right? So we all need to be pushed. But we wound up with these collisions that frankly don't build up local capacity, right? We're here today because people have been working toward this for a long time, and enough silt grew up with all these initiatives that came through Cleveland, and the right leadership is now in place to really take advantage. So I would firmly agree with PG. You've got to have this infrastructure in place that allows people to manage all of these bright ideas that keep emerging and that will continue to emerge. And some of them we need to sort of grab onto and embed in what we're already doing. But the fundamental question about the relationship of our schools and our communities has to be, from my point of view, at the center of all we do. Because then the grade level reading, well, sure, ABC, we can work on that. We're not opposed to kids learning by the 3rd grade. Chronic absence, we can tie that in. That's about our attendance work. So it's really important to keep those things in mind as you communicate about all this.
If I can give one 30-second sort of addition to that, because I think it's an important point for people. The challenge for us has never been money. It's never been resources. The thing that will debunk this over time, here or anywhere else, is turf, right? You're the YMCA and I'm the principal and you're going to do what in my school and what's the mental health provider? So I mean, again, friction is healthy, but it needs dedicated leadership, nimble diplomatic leadership, and everyone has to say, we're family, which means we're allowed to hate each other, but we're still related, right? So, that is what will unravel this process and this work, not resources.
His family, not mine.
I'm very excited about all the wonderful things that you're talking about. The issue that I wonder, could all of you address what's happening with the other schools that are left behind? I'm sure that eventually you hope to add them all in, but what are the parents and the students in the other schools? How are they reacting to this? Are they trying to mimic what's going on? Are they doing it on their own? Could you give a little talk about that?
Excuse me. So I would say that first, we are trying to replicate as quickly as possible. We think this is important for everybody. But also, we have communities that didn't wait. And we have communities that aren't waiting. And so I've spoken with a number of community groups who have said, come help talk to me about how I can work with this school, right? And really, actually, when you have that kind of cooperative process, you can actually move quickly even without kind of the little seed money that got us started. 2 of our partners that are in the 17 existing schools were already well down the road, chose to do it under our umbrella, United Way and District umbrella, wouldn't have had to. And there are others out there, and again, it means then saying, so don't get in a room and have a whole bunch of meetings that don't do anything, because you won't keep coming to that. Get into the room and pick a place of entry and do something. And people really quickly gravitate toward that and make it happen. So for me, it's a both and. How do I replicate it as part of a strategy? But how do I also reinforce and support when it's already grassroots and rising on its own?
All right, excellent. Well, thank you so much for your participation and for the great questions. I have more questions, but I'm hoping we can address them this afternoon when we have Katrina Hicks, who's a principal at H. Barbara Booker on the west side. We've got a site coordinator from Mound, Cassandra Washington, and Dawn Glasgow, who's a Promise Neighborhood Ambassador in the Central Neighborhood. And PG and Marty will also be part of that discussion. So that will help us address things like the relationship between principals and site coordinators. And I'd like to touch on the Broadway P16 and the Promise Neighborhood Initiative run by Sisters of Charity in Cleveland. And other important issues like teacher involvement and collaboration. But with that, we're going to close today. We've had this great discussion today on the opportunities and challenges of Cleveland's Wraparound Schools program. I want to thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. This program is now adjourned.